Season 1 of The Crown on Netflix, about the life and times of Queen Elizabeth II, focused on the young monarch's ascent to the throne and the effect that had on her relationships, particularly with her husband, Philip. Season 2, which debuted earlier this month, continues those themes while also exploring the role of the royal family within a fading empire and changing society. The second season is bookended by crises, as Elizabeth presides over a country rocked by post-colonial conflicts and the Profumo affair, Britain's political scandal of the century. Here's a look back at Season 2 of The Crown and at how the New York Times covered the real-life events it depicts. You can explore each issue in the Times Machine Archive browser. Warning: this feature contains spoilers. Prince Philip is preparing to leave for a months-long world tour, by air and at sea aboard the royal yacht Britannia. The episode is full of hints at never-confirmed rumors of royal marital difficulties. Elizabeth makes an upsetting discovery as she places a secret present for Philip in his briefcase, where she finds a picture of Galina Ulanova, a ballerina with the Bolshoi. At the same time, Prime Minister Anthony Eden wants to strike back after Egypt seizes the Suez Canal. Philip's travels begin with his secretary Michael Parker at his side. Throughout the episode, they discuss their marriage troubles. The Times followed their tour across the Commonwealth, including stops in Ceylon, which soon became Sri Lanka, and New Guinea. Philip opens the 1956 Olympics in Melbourne, Australia, dressed in an Australian military uniform. Suffering from ill health, Prime Minister Eden tells the Queen he must travel to Jamaica. The Queen reads to her children a letter her husband sent from Antarctica, while a film of Philip playing with penguins is projected onto a screen. Pictures of Philip feeding penguins also appeared in the Times. As the tour comes to an end, the royal couple decides to reunite in Lisbon. In a bid to prove their commitment against reports of a royal rift, the Queen makes official her husband's title of Prince Philip. On the political front, the Prime Minister returns to London only to face mounting criticism. He resigns, and Harold Macmillan becomes Prime Minister. The royal couple have returned to London, where Prime Minister Macmillan is working to protect the special relationship with the United States. That same year, 1957, the Queen and Philip mark their 10th anniversary. Princess Margaret and her love life are back in the spotlight. Season 1 chronicled her storied romance with Group Capt. Peter Townsend, a hero of the Battle of Britain whom she loved but was prohibited from marrying because he had been divorced. She briefly gets engaged to Billy Wallace, but the marriage is called off after he has too many drunken mishaps. As in Season 1, Margaret seems lost and has little interest in her royal duties, like sitting for an official portrait by Cecil Beaton. But she meets and falls for the photographer Anthony Armstrong-Jones, who later takes her portrait. The Times wrote about a controversial portrait he took of her in 1959. This episode highlights the relationship the British people have with their monarchy. Lord Altrincham, a young Conservative member of the House of Lords, criticizes the Queen in a magazine article and gets punched in the face for it by a member of the far-right League of Empire Loyalists. Lord Altrincham is invited to meet the Queen to discuss his grievances. He wants her to modernize the monarchy and be more in tune with her people. One of the results of his requests is a televised Christmas address. The Duke of Windsor makes a rare visit to London. His trip is tainted by allegations that he helped disclose Allied war plans to Nazi Germany. He denies as completely untrue the accusations raised by the Marburg Files, which were Nazi Foreign Office documents discovered by Allied soldiers in central Germany after the war. The episode contains reminders of the Duke and Duchess of Windsor's visit to Berlin in 1937. According to the Times, they were received warmly. Here's a profile of the Duke, formerly King Edward VIII, from 1972. The episode also shows Elizabeth's fascination with Billy Graham, the American evangelist, whose visit was chronicled as a top attraction of London. They were just like sponges, drinking up everything about God, Mr. Graham said of the Europeans he encountered on his tour. Princess Margaret is once again reminded of her relationship with Group Capt. Townsend when he announces his intention to marry a Belgian photographer who is 2 decades his junior. Less than 6 months later, the royal family announces Princess Margaret's engagement to Mr. Armstrong Jones, the photographer. It was front-page news in the Times in 1960, under the headline "Margaret will wed a commoner," quoting the official announcement that said the Queen has gladly given her consent. Coverage of the ceremony took up much of the front page and filled 2 other pages with details. Before the wedding, NBC aired an hour-long special about the couple, which the Times called a framework for commercials for refrigerators. That same year, Elizabeth gave birth to her second son, Andrew, second in line to the throne. Here's a copy of the handwritten notice. President John F. Kennedy and his wife, Jacqueline, visit London as the final stop on a tour of European capitals. Queen Elizabeth hosted a private dinner for the Kennedys rather than the state dinner, coveted by visiting heads of state, so the public did not witness the Queen and Mrs. Kennedy's encounter at Buckingham Palace. Here's a look at the menu. But Mrs. Kennedy's picture dominated the London press. One drawing depicted her as the Statue of Liberty with one hand holding the torch of freedom and the other clutching a copy of Vogue. A review sketch was banned by a theatrical censor for dealing unsuitably with the head of state's private life. Soon after, concern is mounting about the Queen's plans to travel to Ghana. Under President Kwame Nkrumah, one of Africa's first independent leaders, the nation is seen as drifting away from the West and into the Soviet sphere of influence. Attacks on Britain in Ghana's official press are seen as a danger to the Queen, but she insists on going and is seen as victorious. An editorial in the Times called the visit an example of the reasons the British monarchy survives in a skeptical and iconoclastic age. Prince Charles becomes the first heir to the British throne to receive a conventional education. For his secondary studies, he is enrolled in Gordon's Tune where his father studied, following a public debate and speculation about his upbringing. The Times magazine called it a commoner's education. He was already the first heir apparent to attend primary school rather than receive private tutoring. Throughout his school years, officials insisted he would not get preferential treatment. And, here's a look at Prince Philip as husband, in 1957, and the Queen as a mother, in 1959. Prince Philip goes to see a society osteopath, Stephen Ward, who is known for his connections with the famous and powerful. Mr. Ward was later arrested on charges related to prostitution in what became one of Britain's biggest political scandals. The Secretary of State for War, John Profumo, had to resign after admitting to an affair he initially denied, with Christine Keeler, a model. Here's the Times obituary published after her death earlier this month. The case goes to trial and Mr. Ward is seen drawing sketches, including one of Prince Philip. Mr. Ward was convicted. The Queen goes to Scotland for some rest after learning she is pregnant with her 4th child. Her sister Margaret is also expecting a baby. Back in London, the Profumo case threatens to take down Prime Minister Macmillan. Rumours of his resignation as leader of the Conservative Party were reported in the Times, and he ended up retiring after a health scare. The finale ends with a family photo shoot that includes the newborn Prince Edward. The royal couple exchanges a moment of tenderness, ending the season on a note of love. Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip celebrated 70 years of marriage last month.